Welcome back to another episode of It Starts With You podcast. Today, I am so excited for our conversation with Tim Hagen. Tim, thank you so much for joining me on here today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So, Tim is someone who I have followed. Actually, Tim, I've followed your work for a while. I actually saw you, I don't think you know this, I actually saw you speak at a conference years ago. I don't know if I ever told you that.
No.
I took one of your sessions, and so I have followed your work for a long time. Tim and I have been connected. I'm really excited for our conversation today, really focused around something that I love to geek out about, which is coaching. So let's do a little intro to Tim. Tim Hagen is a visionary leader and pioneer in the field of workplace coaching and employee development. As the founder and chief coaching strategist of Progress Coaching, Tim has spent over 20 years helping organizations transform their workplace cultures by empowering managers and leaders to build strong coaching skills. Tim's innovative approach focuses on practical, results-driven methods that help leaders foster meaningful relationships, boost employee engagement, and drive performance, which we know we're hearing a lot about right now, people needing to do. His signature project progress coaching system emphasizes the importance of continuous learning, personalized development, and active listening, ensuring that coaching becomes a natural and integral part of workplace dynamics. A sought after speaker, trainer, and author, Tim combines his expertise in behavioral psychology, employee motivation, and leadership development to create programs that are engaging as they are impactful. His commitment to helping organizations thrive has earned him a reputation as a trusted advisor and thought leader in the coaching industry. Tim is passionate about making coaching accessible to all leaders, regardless of their experience level, and believes that the best leaders are those who inspire growth in others. His mission is to help organizations not just manage their teams, but to coach them towards success. Amazing.
Great intro. Much better than I thought.
I love reading. You know what? I was just having this conversation with another guest that I had. Is sometimes when I read it, guests are like, "Oh gosh, you're a speaker. Some people have to introduce you. You
Right.
want people to hear your background, but sometimes you're like, oh, did I do all that?" But I love reading it live when I'm recording with the guest because I want to remind all of my guests of all the amazing things you've done and the impact that you have. And sometimes hearing someone else say it to us is like, oh yeah, I do
Yeah.
that
You
stuff.
almost remind yourself too.
Yeah, and the impact that you have, because I know both you and I are really passionate about helping leaders,
Mhm.
helping organizations. We see the impact. So, first, Tim, I would love to just hear even how did you even get started in this field?
Yeah. I'm a self-proclaimed honest two-time college flunk out. So I had a point .7 grade point, which really impresses people. And I brought it back from a 2.1, and I was working at a YMCA in downtown Milwaukee. And friends from IBM who were members of the YMCA said, "Oh, you should come work at IBM as a college intern."
Mm,
I'd never turned on a computer. And I ended up getting hired talking about walking into a world where I had no clue what anyone was talking about. You know how you say, geez, I didn't know what they were talking about. I literally didn't understand anything. So after about
mm,
90 days, I quit. My boss, Martha, at the time said, why are you quitting? I said, I don't know what anyone's talking about. I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. And she said, why do you think I hired you? I have no idea. Well, it wasn't academic. She said, I hired you because you needed the help. I didn't hire a
mm,
quitter. And I sat there and I was like 99% sure I'm walking out of the office. I'm going to be escorted out. She said, I hired you because you needed the help. I can give you the help, but you got to be willing to accept the help.
mm,
All of a sudden, I went from quitting to I can't quit. So as the conversations went on, I was in her office almost every single day. And I would say negative attitude, angry, wasn't really looking at things the right way. Make a long story short, she brought me in one day. She said, are you avoiding me? I hadn't thought that far ahead because I'm a college kid. And I said, well, no. And of course, I lied. And she said,
yeah.
I bring you in here because I care enough about you to tell you the things most people will never take the time to tell you. What you do with it is a choice. And I sat there and I was like, okay, what do you call that? She said, coaching. That was 40 years
Mm,
ago. And I fell in love with it. And all of a sudden, her office, which I avoided like the plague, became a sanctuary. By the time I left, not because I was smarter, I think I was teaching 13 different courses, started the first
wow.
statewide marketing campaign for college students. I became the IBM printer sales rep for the whole state at the age of 20, 21. But I had a
Wow.
lot of people help me. So my career then kind of skyrocketed into training, coaching, first technology training. But it was really because of her. And she
Mm,
was willing to say things. She could have fired me and would have been less
mhm.
hassle. And she took time. I bet you I was in her office every day for probably 30 minutes. I was like four
Wow.
levels below her. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought it would have had that impact. And then when I left, I couldn't say goodbye because I was so choked up. But my commitment to them, which is 40 years ago, is I will always have a high school or college intern, which I do every year, to pay IBM back because it was such a great experience. That's how
Wow.
I
I
got into
didn't know
coaching.
that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah,
So
it was a lot of fun.
I'm so curious. I want to dig into that, and then I want to hear how you like pivoted into your business. But you said you hit on something really important because it really resonates with me as well as I know people listening. Is the person who had such an impact on you and personally, but also your career, was not the one that was coddling you or maybe even
Mhm.
always saying, it's okay, it's fine. Like it sounds like she was a straight shooter
Mhm.
and was willing to tell you the things that maybe no one else was.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people take that as they don't like me or and I'll just say for me, one of the leaders that has had the most impact on me in my life also was that. I remember in the beginning working with her, I was like, "Oh my gosh, she's really tough."
Yeah.
She says things to me and I took it personally, and then I came to realize like, wow, that was one of the leaders that had the most impact. So, how did you I guess like what would you recommend to somebody who maybe is working with a leader right now who is being really tough on them, like how they could reframe that
In terms of the reception or giving it, or both.
reception?
Yeah. So we actually teach something called EAT feedback, where you embrace, ask, and tell. We practice feedback. And I tell people, well, what if I get upset? I said, just be quiet. But what if I feel it? Said, so what you just alluded to, which I alluded to as well, I think we emotionally interpret. We let our feelings guide our output. And so if you say to me, Tim, that blue shirt looks terrible on you, you look fat. Doesn't mean you're wrong, but I'm going to interpret that and I'm going to get angry and I'm going to come up with a narrative to get mad and I'm going to tell myself story where you and I do a lot of work is, self-awareness, being really honest with yourself, which about 8.5 out of 10 people significantly lack. So when she did that, there wasn't a lot of room for me to negotiate with her. She was in charge. She was the boss. But she had a way of doing it morphed in terse, direct caring. So when I did my first workshop in front of 140 people, she said, "You need to go home." I said, "Why?" She goes, "You're going to hit the wall by about 2 o'clock." I'm like, "Oh no," because I was higher than a kite. Got about 2:30. I could barely keep my eyes open, but she knew. And then she said,
Yeah.
"Okay, now here's what I want to do next." And I was constantly being challenged, which I like change, and I'm sure you like change with the field we're in. So I think the biggest thing we have to do is in companies is practice reception of leadership. Get people practicing and give latitude. Well, I think the CEO made a bad decision, and you know me well enough. I've grabbed people and said, well, let's go talk to him. Let's go talk to her. Well, I don't want to do that. I was, oh, you're just going to gossip in the hallways. And we have to teach people when someone says something, your emotions aren't the best filter. And I think you know this. My boys' volleyball team at Cedarburg, I've coached volleyball for 32 years. They had to get feedback from a teammate. The rule was you could only say thank you. No, you can't give me an example because when we get an example, we then rebuttal the feedback. You just say thank you to your teammate. So I had a kid who went to the Marines, Gabe Capelli, gets done, serves our country, calls me up, and goes, "Coach, Marines were easy." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "It was easy. I just learned to shut up." I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "I hated when you made us do it, but he was the ultimate best teammate." Freshman year, I kicked him off the team. Senior year, he was the leader award. And he learned that. I think we would be wise to teach people coachability, ask for feedback, just listen, don't react, reflect before you react. So we teach something called RIRE, which is an emotional interpretation course we teach. Reflect before you react. Because normally within about an hour, okay, yeah, this blue shirt doesn't look good. And people come to that, but in the moment, we want to push things away from us and we don't want to look at ourselves. And it's a habit that we all practice. And I think leaders inherit a lot of that.
And I mean, all the things you're talking about, it's like, I always use the example of like, we have to hold up that mirror to ourselves of how, I mean, that's that self awareness, but it's like, how am I reacting? How am I seeing this? And
Yeah,
again, you having a leader who was tough on you, it could have gone. Like, you really ultimately ended up having the choice.
sure.
And when people realize that I have a choice in how I react to this,
Yeah.
versus this is being done to me, I think that really makes a big shift because now look, I mean, you were able to go and start? So did you go right from your career there to launching your business?
No, I took a job at a company that did technology training, and I was morphed in coaching. And so my degree's in adult education from UW Milwaukee, but I was coaching volleyball at the age of 19. So I knew those one-on-one conversations were really
Mhm.
helpful. So I've always been one to kind of challenge the paradigm, kind of go against the grain of things. Well, we've always done it this way. You and I both hear it in our businesses. And so I got into a technology training company, and all the classes were 8 to 5. I mean, that's a long day to learn computers. I
Mhm.
mean, my ADD would be going nuts. I would hate it. And then I thought, why aren't we coaching people? Well, it's just easier to get them in the seat. So it was really more for the vendor. It was easy for us to deliver and just book out a whole day. So I ended up starting my first company, I think when I was 24, doing technology coaching. No
Mm.
classroom. We went right into people's offices. We taught them how to use the help engine. We were averaging, I think it was 60 hours of classroom training down to about 17 hours of coaching. Because if
Wow.
you have a PowerPoint, we're going to work on your PowerPoint. You got an Excel
Yep.
spreadsheet next week, we're going to work on that. And I started to realize the power of coaching. But technology, which use a lot of technology, it's never been my turn on as a sole
Mhm.
source. And I wanted to get into more of the mainstream coaching. But back then, which is over 30 years ago, it just wasn't around.
Yeah.
So we ended up doing the whole sales training, customer service training thing. And what I started to notice was in one of our happiest clients, Evan Johnson, our numbers were way up. And the leader said to me, is it you or the program? So what do you care? The numbers are up, which is a pretty naive statement. He said, well, if something happens to you, what happens to this program? I hadn't thought that far ahead. We sat in a room for 9 hours straight the next day and crafted out the first version of the training course to teach leaders. And I
Hmm.
loved it. And it was a client who made me do it. And we ended up, I've been with that client now with 3 different companies. We literally now, I got out of the whole sales training, customer service training, teaching leaders how to coach because you could see the conversations and the impact. Well, Julie, you got to get your numbers up. You're at 85%. Be confident. What does that mean? And
Thanks.
and they
Yeah.
didn't know how to have those conversations. So, 30 years ago, we were an anomaly. We were unique. I mean, now
Yeah.
there's a lot of companies doing it, but we've been teaching leaders how to coach for almost 30 years.
Yeah. I mean,
So it's
that's
really
what's
kind
so
of a
amazing
series of
is,
steps that just stumbled into each other.
yeah, I think that's what's so amazing is you know, even honestly, I mean, even when I was in an organization, I was still working in an organization and I had a leader who took more what I say the coach approach. She was a certified coach. So she took this coach approach to leading. That was the first time I had had a leader do that. Right.
It's
And
still
that was
rare.
not, I mean, that was 7 years ago.
Yeah,
And so it's still, and I think we, in the last few years it's come a long way even, but it's
yeah,
still this whole idea of using coaching, but we can see the impact. And I
hmm,
think for me, I felt it, and that's why I got into coaching, right?
yeah.
Is because you can see the impact. So, Tim, I'm curious, what are some of the big areas, excuse me, when you go into organizations, you're working with leaders, what are some of the big areas that you see them struggling with when it comes to when you bring this to them, especially if this is very different from the way that they had been leading before? What are they
Sure.
struggling with?
Going from telling to asking.
Mm,
Fundamentally, I'd rather tell you have a crappy attitude. Come on, you got to work with
mm-hmm,
Bob. Joanne's a nice person. Just show her some empathy, and we think that works.
mm-hmm,
And if it worked, you and I wouldn't be in business. And
mm-hmm.
versus saying, so what are you going to do to successfully engage with Tom? What are 2 things that you like about Joanne, and how are you going to leverage that in this project? We get the objection all the time. I don't have time to coach.
Yes.
And the reason they don't have time to
Yes,
coach,
address that for us.
yeah, well, it's a mask for I don't know what to do and say. Coaching is a separate language. And
Hmm.
so and I just had this with a VP of finance in a company in New York, a client of ours. He said, well, what do you do if you don't have time to coach? And I said, are you ready? He said, what do you mean? I said, are you ready? Your nose is just about to bleed, both nostrils, because I'm about to walk into the wall. Should we do it privately or publicly? He goes, bring it on. Really great guy. We had fun with it. I go, so you don't have time to coach. Are your numbers up or down? By the way, I know the answer. And he goes, well, they're it's kind of hard to answer. I said, it's not hard to answer. Are they up or down? They're down 17 points, right? He said, well, right. I said, so how are your people improving those numbers? Well, we review numbers all the time. I said, so give me a skill that would really help you. He said, well, we get some front end objections about our fees are the highest in the industry. I said, so how are they practicing that? He said, well, they're on the phones all the time. We don't have time. I said, so they're doing the same thing. You can't argue what I just said. He starts laughing. He goes, okay. I said, do you have turnover? He said, sure. I said, well, you don't interview, right? He said, well, of course I do. I said, oh, you do have time. He goes, all right. My nose bleeding. We started laughing. I go, it is tough because it's new. It's easier to rehire than it is to craft someone at 85% and get him to 100 or whatever the numbers are. And I think it's because people have to practice these things, and it's tough. And where you and I both reside in Wisconsin, two of the best organizations in pro out in Muskego, the Milwaukee Brewers, sales and customer service teams, they are phenomenal at coaching. Phenomenal. But they've been practicing it. If you go to InPro 23 years later from when I started with them, their CEO will tell you, we're still not there. Got to keep getting better. And so I think people and leaders always have this end point. Well, I got the certification. I took the class. I'm at an end point. Well, if you have someone come to you and it's the CEO's nephew and he's always late for work, but he wants to get promoted and he started last Friday, how are you going to have that conversation? You're on. There's no hiding. And I think leaders would be well versed in learning how to ask questions, listen, not always feel like they've got to give the answers. Position, we use the term enablement, I think, too much, but position people to have their own mirrors. I always make the joke when I speak. Your people don't even own mirrors. You want them to hold one up in their face. They don't even own mirrors. They don't even have a mirror in their neighborhood, by the way. So it's going to take time. And what we want to do, because we're so busy tactically, strategically, we want to get them in a headlock and get them there by next Tuesday. People just don't work that way.
And because I love, and those of you listening can probably tell, I love Tim's like straight shooter approach of just like, this is how it
It
is.
gets me in trouble though, too.
I love it. We embrace that here on That Starts With You podcast because we're all about honesty and transparency. But so I want to lean into this because, again, we both know it's important. I know people listening are struggling with this either for themselves or with their teams or with their organizations around this idea of, and I'm curious your thoughts on the term soft skills. But when people say, well, this is just a nice to have, this is kind of one of those like soft skills that, you know what, maybe we'll do it if we have time. What would you say if someone's listening going, sure, maybe we'll do that sometime?
Sure. I would go back to the fundamentals of something to extract from what we teach. And when we engage with clients, typically over 90% of leaders don't know the motivator of their employees, where they want to go. They're not exclusive from the job they currently do. So that requires the crafting of a whole different conversation. So I think the soft skills is really an admission of someone's lack of willingness or comfort of being vulnerable. And so when you get into soft skills, which I hate the term soft skills based on even your question, because it conjures up this is soft and cuddly and nice. Great, don't do it. So what do you do to develop your team? And then all of a sudden they go, what do you mean? I said, well, it's a simple question. I wouldn't do the coaching. So I just had a prospective client say, well, I just don't think we have time to coach. And I said, okay, then don't. The CEO's looking at me like, well, wait a minute, we brought you in to sell us. I go, he doesn't want to be sold. I wouldn't do it. Now, if I were you, I would be asking him, so are we going to always hit our numbers? And the guy looks at me and said, well, you're kind of putting me on the spot. I said, of course you're on the spot. My question to you is, what knowledge do they need? What skills do they need? Where do they need to be confident? And do you know how to coach each one of those components? We call it the tiers of learning. He said, well, it's kind of hard to answer. I said, actually, it's not. And it's tough, right? So when you have a salesperson at 110% goal or customer service metrics, what do? Oh, good. I don't have to coach Julie. She's fine. Oh, by the way, recruiters are calling that person. Oh, you're not taking the time? They'll listen to just about anybody. But according to you, you don't have time. How are you going to find the time to now interview your top recruiter? And then the CEO right here really wants to know why he left. So how you feeling? And the guy goes, you're really good at this. And I go, it's tough because we're asking you to learn something new. And what I would tell you is if you lean in, like you use the term, you're probably coaching more than you know. We just help you put it into a structure to make it a little bit more of a greater cadence, more focused, things like that. But when you find out where somebody wants to go and you help them, they will go through a wall for you. The higher salary from the competitor won't be as appealing. But according to you, you don't have time. And when you don't have time, silence gets really, really loud. So if any of these comments have made you uncomfortable, he said, actually they have. And I said, I get it. Time is tough. I'm with you. But people will never feel better at a company with less time with other people. And he just goes, good point. And he's probably one of our best coaches. But he was actually doing more coaching than what he thought. But coaching is also, to the soft skill question, it's also morphed into in addition to. It's one more thing. Well, it isn't, because you're coaching every day. And leaders will go, what do you mean? I said, if you're not engaged, you're non-verbally coaching them to leave the company. Almost 50% of people are out actively right now looking for jobs. You're telling me conversations are going to hurt you? They're going to help you. And if you find out where someone wants to go and you help them, and there's a book on their desk Monday morning because they want to become a future leader, whatever it might be, that's a game changer. Are you willing to change the game? That's up to you. And so I never try to force a client into anything, but I will give them perspective. And there's sometimes require the candid conversation.
Yeah, and what you're also doing is you're demonstrating for them the types of ways that they can have those conversations. And what I love, you're just talking about where people have this like, oh, well, I don't have time to do it. You don't have time not to do it, right? So I want
Right.
to talk a little bit like what are some of the impact and the results that you see when leaders start utilizing coaching? I mean, I already heard you say a couple, like obviously if we're talking about metrics from sales teams, like how are we seeing an increase in those numbers, but also retention and engagement. I know that's a big conversation I have with organizations is around the engagement scores
Yep.
and those going down in certain areas. So what are some of the big impacts that you see when people actually decide to own this, start implementing it?
Yeah, I would tell you, I'll use a case study, and I have their permission to do this. Aurora Cooperative out in Nebraska. I'm going to answer your question from a little bit of a different perspective. I think some key components when I go to the Brewers, I go to Inpro, now Aurora, is executive sponsorship. Most companies want to push it down to middle management, and that will make me cringe. I'll engage if they ask me to, but it makes me cringe because it becomes a weapon. It gets weaponized above. Why aren't they doing it? And that happens, and leaders go, oh, I don't think our people do it. I said, it happens wherever I go. I've done it 30 years. They will say it. They'll just never say it to you. I think the biggest thing is that the relationships change. So I have a CEO out in Nebraska, leads off every employee session. So we do this mass group coaching with thousands of employees, and he leads every session. Him or Kara, their
Wow.
chief legal counsel. And their numbers have gone up where people feel like they're progressing between 60 to 65% towards their career goals.
Wow.
Now,
That's
people say, oh,
huge.
Tim, you did a great job. You could have hired any moron. The minute you have a CEO doing that, and Kara, who's his chief legal counsel on the executive team, she's fantastic. It's a game changer.
Yeah.
Now it's not a program. Well, I don't know if I buy into the program we hear. I always ask the question of leaders, ask them, how are you using the program? You don't have to agree with everything I say or what you say, but what are you doing to develop your people? The program's not at question here. Your ability to drive your people's at question. If you don't agree with anything I say, I'm okay with that. And so I think the biggest metrics that we see are in leaders' comfort with candid conversations. We make them practice it. Conversations of giving feedback. We also take a reverse perspective where we teach something called a whole coachability learning series. So every week, employees have to go ask for feedback and eat it and just embrace it. And then they have to journal it. So it's publicly visible of what they learned to the executive team and their management team. And what we try to do is get people practicing the elements of conversation. It's a piece of clay. It'll never be written in stone. It's never going to be perfect. So some of the numbers that have gone up are people's feel like they're moving towards their career. Numbers going up 20, 30, 40 points. People feeling like progress is being achieved. Leaders talking about more of their comfort levels. So we teach, at least in the way we teach coaching, is people go through 3 levels of change: effort, progress, and results. The challenge we have is we focus so much on results that we forget that people need to start at effort. And so I always use a youth sports analogy. So when your kid strikes out, what are you going to do? Ground him? He can't hit the ball. But he's going to make a decision if he wants to keep practicing based on parents' reactions. So when a dad, and it's typically a dad, not a mom, yelling, get the bat off your shoulder, what does that kid want to do? He does not want to go back, he or she does not want to go back in that batter's box. And so when I even coach youth sports, I always remember that. I've had dads say, why aren't you yelling at the kids? We're not winning. I said, well, first of all, they're not my kids. Second of all, we will be a winning team by the end of the year. Well, how can you say that? I said, this is my 31st year. I've had one losing season, and I've never yelled at a kid on the
Wow.
court. But I've never yelled at a kid. And the reason I don't yell at kids is I have to get them to feel good about getting better. It's the same principle in the workplace. So when you call people into the office for only the good stuff, you're coaching 10 people. They go, what do you mean? I said, oh, they go back to the cubicles. They're all asking what the boss say. They'll just never tell you. So what we've seen is cultural shifts, numbers going up. I think probably the best company I've ever worked for was Inpro. So their CEO, Mark Collin, is the one who hired me. He was the VP at the time. They now have a director of coaching, Dave Stevens. I was the one who identified him, and then they fired us, which was the whole objective of the relationship.
Yeah.
Dave is a master at this, phenomenal, one of the best coaches I've ever seen. But you have to indoctrinate it internally and then use metrics that are fair. I'm not a huge fan of the traditional workplace engagement study. I look for more comfort to the leader, comfort to the person being coached and led. Then I look at the next set of questions of, as your comfort's gone up, how would you narrate? I think narratives are important. How has this changed you? And I think that's what we look for. So the impact is tremendous. The impact is not immediate. And everybody says, well, how long will it take? I
Yes.
said, for me or you? And people say, well, for us. I said, it depends on participation. We'll have 3 things. Oh, I'm on board. This is awesome. Let me see. This is dumb. Guarantee you'll have those 3 people. I will not talk to the dumb people. You will, because I can't manage or mandate that.
Yeah.
If it feels like it's mandated, I wouldn't make them do it, because that will become a part of your culture as well. So,
Well, and a big word I'm hearing, talk about is just like culture. Like, again, I think from a perspective when we're talking to people and maybe you're sitting here listening, and you're like, okay, well, maybe you're a leader who doesn't have the say to be like, okay, I'm going to change the whole culture. But you can have, I always say it's like the ripple effect. You can have the ripple effect. So what is within your circle of control right now, and how could you start implementing some of these things? I think even from an organization, like they're like, well, we have a long way to go, to change. Like I can change, but this is what I hear sometimes. Well, I can change and I can do this, but I can't make my leader change, and I can't make this change. And it's like, again, you're pushing it all off. Versus if you can take that ownership and realize that changing a culture takes time, but starting these tools and implementing them, and then that starts to catch and goes, oh, how did your team do that? How did your scores go up? Or how did you, all of a sudden it creates that ripple effect, and now you can take ownership of the fact that you all play a part in this.
well, I'll give you 2 great examples, and I'll use Inpro. Mark is a phenomenal CEO, great friend till this day, but challenging. He would challenge you. And Mark said something to me. He goes, we need a case study. We need a success. So we got Sean McCormick, one of the youngest person on their sales or their management leadership team. So for 30 days, he gave no constructive feedback. The activity went up 9%, or the activity went up 11%, sales went up 9%. No constructive feedback, no review of numbers. He said, I thought this was dumb. This was amazing. He goes, I'm noticing they sound different on the phone. So every day he scheduled an outlook, morning and afternoon. He just went and looked for the good stuff, not the negative stuff. And then I ended up coaching a young sales rep there, and his numbers went from 71 to 119% in a year. I was in the meeting where he was being fired. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, we're firing this guy. He's right out of college. And the CEO at the time, Phil Ziegler, said, well, what's your problem? I go, you want to become a coaching culture, so his numbers are low, but we're going to fire him because his numbers are low. He's going to leave kicking and screaming. I'm wondering if he would be wrong. He said, what are you suggesting? I said, well, I'll coach him. I'm here enough. Now, the manager at the time was not thrilled with me. He was not happy with me. And after about a year, I ended up getting 2 guys, Eric Brupnow, Matt Budnick. They're still there. Literally became his peer coaches. I said, guys, do me a favor. Every time he sounds great, go over and tell Chris he sounds great on the phone. If you wouldn't mind, grab him for lunch. Because his problem is he had such a negative attitude. He was reclused from everybody. So Chris's learning project every week had to be a random act of kindness towards a teammate in the department or outside the department. Had nothing to do with sales. So he went from 71 to 119%. And all of a sudden people are in sales. What did they want? They wanted coaching.
Yep.
The manager calls me into the office, kicks me out of the relationship. So I pack up. I'm driving down Apollo Drive in Muskego, Wisconsin. He calls me and goes, are you mad? I said, no, I'm proud of you. That's exactly what you should have done. It's your employee. Now, and that manager, Jeff, was a fantastic coach. In the beginning, it felt like in addition to. And so I think you have to create case studies. You have to create those narratives where people want it versus something they have to do. And that's tricky because you and I both know you walk into organizations, you're walking into a pre-built culture. I believe cultures are made up of the conversations within them. And a lot of times, half the time what gets to you and I, we become the company psychologists because people will confide in us because they can't internally. So going to the source becomes a really big part of at least what we do is, okay, if you're upset with your boss, talk to your boss. Don't tell 3 people because that will create a whole lifeline of interpretation and 12 people not representing you. Only you should represent you. Well, I'm uncomfortable. Then don't have the conversation yet. But don't have it with other people to get it off your chest because you'll feel good in the moment, but you'll feel terrible later when it gets to that person. And it always does.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm thinking what you're talking, I mean, this feedback thing, I would say pretty much when I'm one-on-one coaching with a leader, doesn't matter what level they are, it's astounding to me how uncomfortable so many people are with having feedback conversations. And I think, I would say newer managers, mid-level managers, they might be looking to the time like, oh, they should know how to do this. A lot of the times they don't. They're not
Yeah.
comfortable with it. They don't know a framework to do it. They
Yep.
think that they've been giving feedback and they haven't. They've been beating around the bush or they've just, so it's so, I think sometimes when we can just humanize that, like sometimes people, you might make assumptions that they should know how to do these things.
Yeah.
And when you get in there and realize, okay, they don't either. I think it's, to me, I'm going, why aren't we learning these skills at younger ages to be able to have these tough conversations, to be able to coach? Because, like, again, I've seen the impact of using coaching not only just in your work, but in your personal life
Yeah.
too, and the impact it has. So, I mean, obviously, you coach teams, but what have you seen either for yourself personally or leaders you work with of the impact beyond just the workplace when you adopt this mindset of even just asking more questions and listening and
Yeah. I would say home. I think that there's a parallel, and I think probably one of the best examples I had was on an all company floor in front of the executive team, people from the shop floor, management, office people, and a guy got up in front of a whole company and literally said, "Well, you don't know what it's like to work for a company and get an annual raise of 2%." By the way, he's saying this in front of HR, the CEO, and I'm sitting there like, "Oh, I hope you're well liked," because it was. And he just was going off and he had expletives out and he was really upset. And so at the end, I said to him, I said, "No." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "My answer is no." He said, "It doesn't even make sense." I said, "You asked me a question. Do I know what that's like?" The answer is no. You don't even remember what you asked because you're so upset. And he said, "Oh, okay." And he was still pretty volatile. And I said at the end, I said, "What are you doing outside of work to improve you?" And he said, "Well, I've got 3 kids and blah, 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 blah." And I said, "I didn't ask you how many kids," and I had to, so don't read into this. I said, "I don't care if you have 12 kids. Nobody in this room does based on the way you're behaving right now. What are you doing outside of work to improve you?" If the answer is nothing, say nothing. He said, "Well, I don't think you understand." I said, "I think I can tell you why you're only getting a 2% raise." And he goes, "Why?" I go, "You can't answer questions. What are you doing?" He goes, "Nothing." I said, "Great. I want you to think about something, but you can't talk for 90 seconds. What if you came home and announced to your 3 boys that you got a raise and you're going to a Brewer game? You're going to go out to dinner to celebrate. I'm wondering what modeling you would be providing your 3 children." He goes, "Yeah, 90 seconds. And so we all just sat there for 90 seconds, about 200 people. And all of a sudden at 90 seconds, I said, "Calmly walk me through honestly what's going through." He goes, "They would be proud of me." I said, "Let's start there." He's now a supervisor. But in that moment, when you behave that way, people don't walk towards you, they walk away from you. So what he had to do for 8 minutes in the first month, once a week for 2 minutes, go get feedback, say thank you, and walk away. He comes up to me after 8 minutes. He goes, "That is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life." I said, "What does that teach you about you?" And he goes, "I have a long way to go." I said, "We all do. We all got some crap we're dealing with. But you manned up. That was awesome. Now you got to make people around you feel really good. How do you praise other people?" "Gosh, I don't know if I do." And I said, "So next week for 2 minutes each week, you're going to write a note to the boss. You're going to call someone into the office. You're going to put a note on their desk. You're going to do whatever it is. and you're going to praise someone for something they specifically did well. And I think we inherit in the workplace these learned behaviors from kids. So I have my ex-volleyball players. I'm at 3 weddings this summer from ex-players. Coach, I'm in my MBA program. We talk about EQ all the time. I already know it because you made us do it during volleyball. But I wanted them to understand you're going to hear stuff in life you don't like. But the question you have to ask yourself, is that person willing to come back a second and third time based on how you react? And the minute you hear silence, you should freak out because they're talking about you in a private room. And we have to cultivate that. I think our school systems need to do that. Teach kids you're going to go through some crap, you're going to go through change, you're going to have to be resilient. My favorite book, I've gotten it for both my kids, is Grit by Angela Duckworth. It's the greatest determinant of people's success: guts, resilience, intensity, tenacity. We have a whole program called Coaching to Grit. Life's tough. Get tough. Doesn't mean we're not empathetic. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about people. But when things get tough, man, some people can fold like chairs. And I think it's that upbringing, it's the childhood, it can be so many things we inherit in the workplace. I think about the whole youth sports analogy. The minute a parent goes to the coach, they say, well, I did it privately. Your kid knows. My kid got cut from freshman baseball. I had 6 calls. Why don't you call the coach? His son's your client at the Brewers. I said, and get my kid put on the team and ostracized with his friends. So I had to coach my kid to, your friends didn't cut you. The coaches cut you, whether fair or unfair. Your friends play in 2 weeks. A person with character goes. A person who comes up with BS excuses stays home and comes up with their own narrative. Whatever choice you have, I'll support you. He was the only kid cut that went to that team, went to that game. And then he made it the next year. And then he realized, I'm not that great of a baseball player. And he wasn't. But he had to learn self-awareness. And he was 14, 15 at the time. Does it always work that well? No. But now when he gets into situations where he gets feedback, he just nods his head and walks away. He doesn't fight it. And I think we learn a lot of that stuff. And I think what's unfair to leaders is we inherit a lot of that stuff in the workplace. Childhoods, prior bosses, people who don't speak up because their boss would yell at them. All those things are there. And it requires us to have conversations with our people.
That Grit, I was able to see her speak.
Oh, she's great.
A couple years ago, and yeah, that word grit, and I think everything that you said, yes, I mean, parenting definitely, like, man, we try and utilize coaching skills. I have he's almost 8, and he knows, we'll talk about using coaching skills, and in our house with my husband, sometimes it's a catch-22 because it's like, do you want me to coach you right now? Do you want advice? We're trying to play that, like, do you want me to just listen? But you can see the impact. And I know people say, like, oh man, kids should learn coaching skills. I'm like, I agree. I am not raising my hand to volunteer to change my my focus to coaching children, but I do think they should learn those skills. Get a lot of patience for that. What was it?
Part of our program is our high school kids had to coach club. And I would sit down as loud as I can be. If you've ever seen me coach a volleyball match, it's not quiet. I would sit at the end of the bench, I wouldn't even hiccup loud. But I told the parents, if you go near that 17-year-old, your kid won't play. Don't even go near the bench. Let he or she have their moment. So when I resigned after 5 years, which was part of the plan, starting a high school program is a lot of work. The guy who's now doing it has 2 high school girls, assistant coaches at Cedarburg, coaching their peers in high school on the volleyball team without prejudice, without attitude, without pushback. I pulled both these young ladies aside and said, I am so proud. I mean, I know both of them. And one is the daughter of one of the coaches. The other is the sister of a kid who played for me. I said, you're learning a skill that you'll think this conversation means nothing. In about 6 years, you're going to remember this conversation. What you're doing as young ladies coaching more on high school boys, your leadership careers, if you choose leadership, will absolutely exponentially be better than you can ever imagine. I think there should be coaching for kids and teaching them how to do it. We did it in our volleyball program, and the results were fantastic.
It's amazing, man. You can take that skill into so many areas. It's absolutely amazing. So Tim, I have a page of notes written down because I'm a note taker, and I'm like writing down so many great tips that you had. What would you say? So someone's listening and they're like, okay, I want to start implementing more coaching. What's just like 1 or 2 things? Like if you were like, if I could shake you right now and tell you, like, you know what, you got to start with this, what would you tell them?
Start every conversation with 3 what questions. Never start a conversation with why, and practice the living heck out of it. When you get the answers to all three, demonstrate active listening, which builds trust. Julie, here are the three things that I heard you say. Did I get that wrong? Do I have that correct? What that ultimately does is build trust. The minute a leader says, no, 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 Julie, what you want to do, and I interrupt you, I've dismissed you. People will then hide as leaders behind, well, that wasn't my intention. Yeah, but the perception you created, it was about you, not them. So we teach something called, you're always going to have the battle of intent versus perception. Start every conversation with 3 what questions, never why, because it puts people in a defensive posture. Demonstrate that you were listening. You will see an exponential difference over time.
I love that. Great tips. So start them with what questions and practice. Like I
And
want to
practice
emphasize
like
that.
crazy.
Don't expect yourself to get it right away. Give yourself
Practice.
grace, but you can't give up doing it because you can't expect yourself to know. I mean, Tim's been doing this. You've been in this business for 30 years. You still practice, right? Like,
I probably role play 40 to 50 times a week.
yeah. So those of
And,
you
and, and
listening saying, I had one conversation once a week
yeah.
ago.
And then what happens is, well, Tim, I tried your questions. It didn't work. And I said, what happened? Well, they were really resistant. I'm like, oh my God, get them in a headlock, fire them. What? I said, people, you didn't show up once and they're going to immediately react to you like that. They might be saying, geez, why are you asking me all these questions? I'm a little uncomfortable. It takes time. I think the biggest thing that we could do, and I don't know why we've gotten away from it, and that's why I love Angela Duckworth. She has a whole section on the craft of practice. We do not practice enough. So when people say, I don't want to have a tough conversation, the reason people don't is they're scared of what's coming back. So we disable ourselves from having the conversation, and then ultimately what happens? We don't have it. It festers. It never goes away.
Yes.
But when we do have it, well, it didn't go well. The guy got mad at me or she got mad at me. Okay, but you had it. Now you got to practice it. Now you got to keep doing it. And so I don't fear conversations of conflict. So my battle is sometimes I don't come off overly empathetic when I have them, which is something I got to improve. And I practice it actually with a coach. The crafting of practice, which has just completely left our workplace in a lot of ways, is too bad. Because I think if our leaders were well practiced in asking open-ended questions and just listening, teams would tremendously improve.
Isn't that crazy? It could create such a shift.
Yeah.
Tim, thank you so much for this conversation.
Sure.
Those of you listening, hopefully you got a lot of tips. Hopefully you got some ideas. Hopefully if you've been sitting on this thinking like, is there something to this? There is. We can tell you there is. There's results to show it. But also the whole shift of how you feel. I mean, confidence is a big word I hear from leaders. I want to feel more confident as leader, which we know can mean 100 million different things.
Sure.
But when you can get more confident, having conversations with people, being able to ask those questions, it can create huge shifts for you and your team.
Yeah.
So Tim, before we leave, anything that you have going on right now that you want to share with our listeners, and then also let us know how they can find you.
Yeah, so we're, obviously LinkedIn, I'm on a lot. They can find us on LinkedIn. I think our website, progresscoachingleader.com. I think the biggest thing we're working on right now is with companies. We've created a whole coachability learning series for individual contributors, making it easy for people to give feedback to their audience, to give mentoring, to give coaching, but teaching people the reception part. Because I think so much of our industry is in a downward trajectory from top to bottom, leadership, scaling it. I think we also have to go upward where employees can say to leaders, I need some feedback, and just say thank you. The mindset of the leader will be, okay, they're making this easy for me. I'm going to do more of it. Then they have to remember to also leverage what we teach, 3-to-1 ratio of strengths to areas where they need to improve. If we cloak it in more positivity, we open up the door to where people know they need to improve.
Amazing. So what we'll do is we'll drop check out the show notes for the links to connect with Tim and follow him, and for information about his offerings. Tim, thank you so much
Sure.
again. I so appreciate this conversation. Every time I have a conversation with you, I'm like, oh yeah, oh yes, that's such a great point. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for listening. Make sure that when you listen to this episode, share it out, tag both Tim and myself. And also send him a message and say, hey, wow, thanks so much. This really stood out for me, because he gave his time here to talk to you. And I'm sure that, you've got some things rolling around that you want to share with him. So send him a message, say, hey, I listened to the episode and I loved what you shared.
Thanks,
All right,
Julie.
everybody, remember it starts with you, and have a great day.